Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Gorczyca. My presentation is Nowhere to Hide, a look at network forensics. So a little bit about me. I'm a native to Jackson, Michigan. I live right here in the area. I work for an energy company. They didn't specifically sponsor my talk, so I don't want to say who. But I work for an energy company in Michigan. I do mostly system administration, system engineering type work. I don't work in security. I'm mostly more working on servers and that kind of fun stuff. Forensics is a hobby of mine. I like memory forensics, network forensics, and malware analysis. All of this is just stuff I've learned on my own time. This isn't something I do at work. So I'm by no means an expert on the subject. This is the reason I say that is I want you to take this with a grain of salt. It's not like I've perfected this at a company doing work. This is more just my own interest. So if you were looking to do this at your company, I can give you some good information, but it's not going to be the total solution. And for the pictures on there, the Polish symbol there is my Twitter picture, so if you want to look me up, that'll help you find me a little easier. A couple quick disclaimers. I am not endorsing any of the tools, software, organizations, etc. involved in this. The tools are just the ones I like to use. They're not the only tools available. I'm not supporting anything in particular. The scenario is something I made myself. I set up all the files. It's not based on any organization, real-life occurrence, any famous hacks or anything, any similarity to any actual person, organization, event. It's purely coincidental. I made up the name of the company, just random, so if there is actually a company out there with that name, I apologize. That was not my intent. And finally, all the ideas, opinions, etc. are my own and should not be considered that of my employer. So network forensics, what is it? Network forensics there's a lot of different ways to define it. I personally like to think of it just as observing network traffic to determine what occurred on that network. So you might have a capture, you might look at it live. Capture is the easiest way to do it. And you're just going to look at the traffic, determine who talked to who, why were they talking to who, what were they sending, what were they doing. There are some subcategories that it gets broken into. This is more academic. It doesn't really apply to actually doing it. Protocol analysis is looking at the individual protocols and the numbers of data that represent different parts of the individual protocols. So like HTTP, is it a GET command? Is it a POST command? What's happening within that specific protocol to determine what's going on? Packet analysis looks more at the packet as a whole, including IP addresses, MAC addresses, size, that kind of thing. And then flow analysis is the conversation. Who's talking to who? Where is the data going? Volume of data. Is one person sending a lot of stuff to a bunch of people? Is it one-on-one? Is it a lot of data one way, not a lot the other direction? Is it back and forth? Is it sporadic? That kind of thing. That kind of gives you a good idea of what's occurring on the network. Why are they talking to who, and what type of data might they be sending? How do you do it? You have to have, there's a couple tools that you need the tools to do different things. First, you have to be able to capture the network data. Wireshark, TCP dump are great for that. There's a lot of tools, so I'm not trying to focus on these necessarily, but you just have to capture the data so that you can look at it. Then you actually have to look at it. You need to analyze. Wireshark's, again, a good tool for that. Network Miner is really handy. And there's a lot of tools out there, so this is not meant to be an actual list, just some examples. They make specialized tools, so there's a lot of cool people in this industry who work on this. So there's things like TCP flow, TCP extract. TCP extract automatically carves files from TCP streams. So that one's pretty cool. There's endless number of tools. So if you're interested, GitHub's a good place to look at them. And local tools on systems involved can sometimes be useful if you need to, you can ping something. Some or like traceroute. they're not always best to use if you're trying not to mess with the data that's occurring, if you don't want to interact directly with the traffic. But like netstat, you can listen to, or you can see what they're listening to, ARP tables. You can also get local logs from like switches, routers, those kind of things. And then access logs, like on your network, or exchange logs can also be very handy, even though it's not specifically a network-related thing. And finally, some non-network tools like hex editors is a good example. We're actually going to use that in an example today. And the techniques on how, one big piece of advice I can say is to know the protocols. You know, when you just start out, you're not going to know them very well. You have to kind of start looking into it. But books on like TCP, how it works, Wikipedia gives you a good breakdown of how the protocols themselves. And then to just get some network traffic and look at it. And then just study how the protocols work so you understand when you're looking at it what's abnormal, what's supposed to be there, and that gives you a good understanding of how it operates. And choosing the right tool is important. You want to pick one that works for you. So just because Wireshark, it's a big one, it's very popular, but that might not be something that's really useful to you. And other than that, it's basically just looking at the data and try to determine what it does. So most people, I'm sure, here are familiar with encryption, but I just wanted to do a quick review because it's important to network forensics in the sense of if it's encrypted, you can't look at it. Encryption is very useful for security. I like having my stuff encrypted when I send it, but it's really hard to, it's impossible to look at data that's encrypted and understand it. But there are ways around it because there's a difference between like one-way SSL and two-way SSL. One-way SSL, if you have a private key of the exchange, you can decrypt it. And like a lot of tools have plugins or they're designed to do that. And you can decrypt the traffic and look at it. Two-way is a different story. Even if you have a key second hand, you cannot do it after the fact. That's the way it works, and it's really handy. The key exchanges matter too, like RSA. There's a specific couple RSA exchanges that can be decrypted within one-way SSL. If it's Diffie-Hellman, you're done. But that makes proxies really useful, and this is where, like, if you want to do a forensic investigations at a company, proxies are really useful because you can set up a network proxy that decrypts the SSL, and you can either have it output it to the side as decrypted, or like in the example I did, I set it up so that the communication between the proxy and the internal hosts is one-way SSL that's decryptable, but the two-way SSL occurs on the internet. So that way you can intercept the traffic, determine what it's doing, and then it's still secure going through public segments. So most of this talk is going to be a live demo. Hopefully the demo gods liked the sacrifice I made. Hopefully this goes well, but so here's a quick scenario that I made up, and we're going to go through it. The idea is Fred, an employee at Solid Water Solutions, has shown some behavior recently that made his employer concerned he might be unhappy at work. He has access to the company's secret recipe, and some recent suspicious activity makes them think that he's trying to steal the company's data. As network investigator, you've been tasked to examine the traffic and determine what he's been up to. It's a quick piece of information going forward. They gave us, in this scenario, we have Fred's MAC address. Their local LAN is 192.168.217.0/24. The gateway is .254, and it's running an SSL decryption proxy. The certificate running on that proxy, the key has been given to us. And for the sake of this scenario, 192.168.137.0/24 will represent the internet because I didn't want like actual public IPs going through this. So and then in this scenario, a combination of access logs and video surveillance has already shown that Fred was at his desk, logged into his computer, so they know everything going on from Fred's computer, unless there was malware, was Fred himself. So I'm going to pull up Wireshark, and there's a lot of traffic to go through. But so one of the first things you want to do when you're investigating is to look for anomalies. So one thing that stands out with the ICMP ping is the length of this packet is 176 bytes. Normally it should be about 74, 76. So that's abnormal. And so we might want to take a look at why is that larger than it should be. And if we look at the actual raw data, move this out of the way. See some ASCII text included in the data segment. Seems to spell out a little bit of a message. So it says, "Hey, shady dealer, it's Fred. I'll do the deal. The company's secret recipe for the agreed 250,000. I'm uploading it to your site now." So right off, this doesn't look good for Fred. He's mentioning his name. It came from his computer. If we go back out here, we can look there. You can match his MAC address to the one they provided for us. So it's 000C 29EB64FC. If we look right here, the source hardware address matches, so we can confirm that was Fred's PC, and they've already confirmed for us he was logged in. So he sent this parent message in a ICMP ping to someone addressed as Shady Dealer, who's obviously a law-abiding citizen. So it's not looking too good for Fred, but we can't prove that he did anything wrong yet, other than message this person, and perhaps this 192.168.137.139, which is on the internet in this scenario. That could be, we could check, see if that's a blacklisted IP. Is he talking to someone he shouldn't be? So the next step will be to follow a little bit more onto this communication. So if we go down here, we see now we've got some SSL traffic, or TLS technically. So they're communicating, and if we go down into the actual data, it's encrypted. All the data is encrypted. There's no way for us to actually see what he's looking at. Fortunately, they're running a proxy and they provide us the key. And Wireshark has a handy built-in plug-in to, or it's built into their preferences on protocols where you can actually decrypt it. So if you go to, I'll start this over so you can, if you want to follow along. So if you were going to do this at home, under Wireshark, if you go to Edit, go down to Preferences, select Open Up Protocols, and then just find SSL. And then where it says RSA key list, and again, this only applies to RSA key exchange, so if it was another, like Diffie-Hellman key exchange, it's not going to work as well. Go to Edit, and then this is one that I was using for the CTF. So also, if you do the CTF 313, there actually is a challenge that works very similar to this. So, yes?
Before I continue, can you move your microphone?
It's not.
Well, something is hitting on it.
Okay. Yep.
Oh, your shirt.
Is that good? All right. So if you click the plus button, it'll add a new one, and so we'll need the IP address. And I generally prefer to go with the web server in this kind of environment, because then it's easier to pick the port, because they're going to use the web server is going to be using default 443, but the client is going to pick a random port. So 192.168.137.139. Port's going to be 443. Protocol, and this is the protocol it's going to decode into. So in typical SSL or TLS, it's going to go to HTTP content. So if this was like FTP over SSL, you would need to specify FTP here. So it's the protocol it's being translated into. The key file. And there's two ways to get this. If you use you can actually use like a .p12 certificate, but then you'll have to specify a password because the P12s are secured with a password. But a key file generally has no password, so we don't have to put anything in here. And a note, if you're going to do this, especially at a company, that password is stored in Wireshark in plain text. So I would recommend if you're going to use an actual production cert, that you would want to only put this in here when you're doing investigations and then remove it. Otherwise, it'll be stored in plain text, and that can ruin your day. So once we apply that, Wireshark will go through and decrypt our stuff. And now we have clear text HTTP packets we can look at. So that'll give us, now we can actually see what's going on. So we see a GET request. The Fred's PC is reaching out to the web server and requesting a website, and they got it okay. There's also apparently a picture, but according to this traffic, it's not found. So whatever picture was actually didn't load. Not that that's significant, but in other scenarios it might be important depending on what type of traffic that they're doing, what they're looking at. So a really good way to get a good grasp of what's going on here is to follow just that stream. So if you go to Wireshark, you can follow the SSL stream, and it also brings up this thing of the data itself that we're looking at. And so if we want to find out what Fred's doing, we can look at this a bit closer, but we really want to know is, did he steal any data from the company? And in order to prove that, we're going to actually have to get that data to present it to the company and say, hey, is this the information that you're worried about losing? So like even just a file name is probably not going to be enough for like incriminating evidence. So if we go through this data here, we can actually get the file itself. So the good way to do that is we can save this file as a file, and you want to make sure you do it in a raw format, because if it translates, Wireshark automatically translates stuff into whatever format it picks. So if it's an ASCII code and you save it off as an ASCII, then when you try to open the actual file, it'll already have translated into ASCII code. So if it's a text file, it'll work great. You can just pull the data and it'll work fine. But if it's an actual, like if it's an image or an executable or a video or any other type of file like that, then it'll have translated into ASCII, and then you can't reload it as an actual file. It'll have corrupted the code. So there's a show and save text thing down here in the corner, and you want to specify that to raw. And it doesn't look like anything here, but this is the actual raw data of the file itself. And another thing to note is this is the two sides of the conversation. So this is the red up here is from Fred's PC going this way. The blue is everything that came back. And actually in this case, we can even see the web page itself, because that's just in direct ASCII. That's not any kind of special format. So if we want, we can even pull this and look at the website that Fred saw. Just drop this on the desktop here. Save it as HTML. And so this is the web page that Fred visited. So it's up at the top. The name displays in the tab is Digital Back Alley, which doesn't sound particularly legitimate. And the page is pretty empty. Just a select an image to upload with a Choose File button, and then you can upload whichever file that you uploaded. And as we noted earlier, the picture doesn't actually show up, which if it had showed up in the web page, then we would have to carve that file out as well and put it in the same folder as the new web page that we just saved off in order to actually see it. And even that, depending on how they coded their website, might not work because it might be looking for a specific location instead of the location that the site's stored in. But this is the website Fred saw. So it's more evidence that Fred's not necessarily behaving, because this website doesn't look very legitimate. One fun thing you can also, if you want to start digging through the, like this is more the protocol analysis side, you can go through the HTTP code and determine like what user agent was being used to look at this. So this is Mozilla, so Firefox. It's got information about the host. And then you can also see like what the web server is like. In this case, they're running IIS 7.5. So this hacker website is not very secure themselves. But there's a lot of information, and one of the things about network forensics is, like all forensics, there's a lot of data to go through, and you have to figure out what's important to you. So when you're doing an investigation, information you want to have a list of like dirty words or dirty values of stuff you're looking for. So does this contain this person's name? Does it contain this IP address? Does it contain this file name? Because this particular file is I made it for this presentation, and it's 182 packets. And then this is not all communication between Fred and this server. In an actual environment, as I'm sure most of you have seen, there could be hundreds of thousands of packets in a minute. So you can't just scroll through it and necessarily find what you're looking for very easily, because there's going to be way too much traffic to sort through. So you really have to get, that's when you start searching for keywords and phrases, which Wireshark does have a find packet option. You can specify a hex value that would be in this data part down here. There's expressions. String is one that'll pull up information from the info tab, so you could search for Git, and it'll find all of the packets that have Git in the info tab, which is just the basic information of what Wireshark could find about the packet itself. So now that we have this data stream, and we've already found the website, see if we can actually find some the file that the company's worried about losing. So they provided us with what they're specifically concerned about is their secret recipe, which they gave us a copy of. So we'll be able to compare once we find the file that Fred may or may not have done anything with, and compare it. And but before we do this, another thing you might search for is, if say if a keyword, if we used post command, because if it's HTTP stream, and we can check and see if he sent anything, which there is one here. And so there's a post command of uploaded. There was a file uploaded. So that might be our level of concern that there is a file uploaded, so maybe Fred actually did do something. So we can save this. And it's raw data, so it's not actually going to have a file extension, which is, I'm sure Windows won't appreciate. But so now we have a file stream, and this is where like a hex editor is going to come in, because this is just raw binary data. So if we try to open this in something else, it's not going to like it, or we're not going to be able to see anything. So I typically use the Bless hex editor if I'm working on like a Linux box, because that's my favorite hex editor. But I couldn't find a copy for Windows, so I had to use coincidentally Fred as my hex editor. And a hex editor basically is broken into two main panes. Or three. There's the byte offset, the actual bytes shown in hexadecimal, and then an ASCII representation on the side. And so this is helpful for finding where you need to get to actually start carving the data. So part of that knowing protocols does get taken away a little bit if depending on the tool you use, because Wireshark is really good at showcasing areas where the different protocols interact, and there's tons of protocols already loaded into Wireshark. It tells you where everything goes, and so on the post command, it'll show you where your file itself is and the boundaries between them. And also, when we look at this section here, it says, well, there's also a file name, secretcompanyrecipe.docx, which is the name of the file that they gave us, so it's starting to look bad for this company. And then it shows that it's a compressed zip file, which you may or may not know, docx files are actually zip files at the heart of it. So it's more evidence that an actual docx file was uploaded. So this is, and then if you notice here in the hex part, there says PK. This is the header signal for a zip file. So this is where the file actually starts. Is right here. So we can look at the bytes at the side here and the offset and determine where to start carving. So we find the matching spot here, and then Wireshark will mention all the different stuff like encapsulation protocols and whatnot. So it'll say here, you can also notice it's MIME format, and a typical sign of MIME is that starts of files are noted by this sequence of 0D, 0A, 0D, 0A. So it's another good way to find it if you're doing this like by hand through data that you captured maybe through TCP dump, and you don't have access to Wireshark's information on where different stuff is within the data stream. So that's again where like that knowing the protocols thing is really handy. If you know that MIME specifies with this segment, then that's definitely helpful. So everything that came before that is not the file. So we have to carve all that out. And so it'll start there, and then we just need to find the end of the file. And again, Wireshark comes to the rescue. So there's a 0D, 0A followed by 2D fairly repetitively. So that's something that shouldn't be too hard to find once we get near the bottom. Perhaps not there. Here it is. So this is all stuff that came after the file in the data stream. So we cut that away. Now this is the part where if this is going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong right now. So we'll just name this file captured. And we'll rename it .docx. Fire it up and see what it looks like. Alright, so we've got top secret recipe for companies only, and there's their secret recipe for ice. That's solid water solutions. So now we can compare this to the one they gave us. Looks pretty much the same. So there's a indication that so this is pretty much right here, pretty solid, of that it was the company's recipe. We can take it a step further and hash these. So we zoom in here. This is our SHA-256, and we'll just look at the last couple, 7B20. And that's the one we captured. I think I just closed magnifier. If I could spell. Here we go. So 7B20. So this is in fact the same file. So yes, did Fred steal company information? We can say the answer is in fact yes. It's not so great for the company, but we can successfully prove by this process of finding out what Fred's doing, decrypt the traffic, carve the files, can prove that Fred did in fact steal this file from the company. So network forensics is pretty useful in that sense. That there are other ways, like memory forensics can probably give you a pretty similar picture of what happened, but this is a really good way to indicate this traffic did go through our network, went out to the internet. There's response back from the web server, and we can tell that this file, in fact, we can, following the stream where it said post, they sent back an OK, HTTP OK, which means they received the file. So whatever malicious site this is, that file actually was uploaded to it, and we can prove what file it was. And so a quick note on the some techniques here, speaking of hashes. When you're working in network forensics, it's really important to make sure you don't, or any forensics, make sure you don't disturb the actual data files. So a common practice is to save a copy of, like, say, the packet capture, and then hash it, and that way you can, when you do your investigation, you can hash the file, the one you worked on, and compare it to the hash of the original, and prove that the file was not altered and the data was not altered. So in terms of a criminal investigation, it's extremely important that the data not be changed, because then they could, that's evidence is now dismissible because you could have altered it. Oops. There we go. So, there we go. So, did Fred take the file? Yes, he did. That's it's unfortunate for the company, but it's good for us. We did our job. That's pretty much all I have. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take those. There's a couple resources if you're interested, kind of some stuff that got me started. Forensicscontest.com is a great resource. They have a lot of practice scenarios you can do. That's how I started. Then the other one on here is just a source of, there's a lot of PCAP files. I recently discovered this. I'm eager to look into them. But they've got tons and tons of PCAP files of a bunch of different scenarios where there's malware involved, web traffic. There's some from some cyber defense competitions on there. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. And then at Lucas Gorczyca, that's me on Twitter. Again, the Polish Falcon is my Twitter picture, so help you find me a little easier. But that's pretty much all I have. So does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Aside from what sounds like using a local proxy, is there something that, or getting rid of that, like, is there something Fred could have done to make your job harder? In that, at least that first tactic, if there was something weird happening?
Yeah, so the question was, aside from, trying to avoid the proxy, is there anything that Fred could have done to avoid detection? And there's a lot of things. This was a very simple and basic analysis. Like, for example, if you're trying to avoid detection, I probably wouldn't try to hide a plain text message in an ICMP ping. But that actually, though, is a viable exfiltration method people have used. So it kind of depends. Obviously, like if the shady dealer did his due diligence, then he probably would have set up a better method of getting the file, or Fred could have encrypted the file and then sent it, in which case it'd be a lot harder for us to get unless he sent the password through the same data stream. So there's a lot of stuff you can do to hide your tracks. This is kind of more of a simple setup, but yeah, there's a lot more you can do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.